RJ, it is finally the week. This week, we are going to see the Seattle Kraken take the ice for the first time in an official capacity because this Thursday, September 23rd, training camp officially kicks off. I am so excited for this. How about you, right? Like, we're all excited.
Absolutely. Like, I am thrilled. We get to see Kraken players. They're on the ice and, yeah, get our first real sense of, what the team's going to look like and play together.
Yeah, that's right. And you're going to be there covering that. So if anybody else is going, make sure to say hi to RJ. I'm sure he'll have stickers. He can give you guys one of those. If you can't attend because you got work or whatever, couldn't get tickets, we'll be covering it extensively all the days that it's going on. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Emerald City HKY, Instagram's the same, and the website, emeraldcityhockey.com. Now, because training camp is just a couple days away, we decided to, we all have questions as we go into the Seattle Kraken's first inaugural season here, and especially for training camp because it's going to be a first time that the team's going to all be together and the coaching staff's going to be there and they're going to be trying to figure out a lot of things, I'm sure. So we thought we'd kind of share with you some of the big questions we both have as we head into training camp here in just a couple of days. So, RJ, why don't you kick us off? What's the first question you have that you're looking to get answered, later this week?
So, yeah, the first question that I have that I'm looking for a takeaway from this training camp is centered around, well, the centers, and particularly the number one center, Yanni Gourde. He's going to be out for maybe the first few months. I've heard a few months. I've heard a month or two with a shoulder injury. And I want to see who's going to play center with Yanni Gourde out because that's a big hole to fill. We know Alex Wenberg is going to play center, but beyond that, there are a lot of question marks. We have guys like Kalle Yarncroke, McCann, Johansson, Geeky, Blackwell, all with at least some experience playing center, but they aren't necessarily, all dedicated centers that have a lot of experience there. So Dylan, what do you think is going to happen as far as who's going to shift into center and who do you expect to emerge from that?
Yeah, so I'm with you. Wenberg is the one for sure guy. I think he's going to probably be their 1C to start the season, and I'm pretty happy about that. So far, what we've seen and heard from him is that he's really hungry and he's really excited about that opportunity. This is kind of the first chance he's had to prove that he belongs, solidly in a top six role, and I'm really excited to see him there. I think McCann's going to for sure be playing center for this team, especially at the beginning of the year. I would keep Geeky at center because he's a face-off beast, so I think he's got to be there, most likely on the fourth line. I like Colin Blackwell on the wing, so I would want to keep him over there. So, I also like Johansson kind of on the wing too. I think Kalle Yarncroke's the guy that makes sense to slide in and be, probably the third line center for this team. Although I think he could possibly, if he outplays McCann, I could see him as the second line center just to start the season, just because of his responsibility, his solid two-way play and all the stuff he brings, just his versatility. He could play all sorts of different roles. So for my money, I'd say that the four centers to start the season should or most likely will be Wenberg, McCann, Yarncroke, and Morgan Geeky. Does that kind of line up with what you're thinking?
It does, and I redid our projected Kraken lineup. I updated it to take into account Gourde missing the season, and that's what I came up with. Wenberg 1, McCann 2, Yarncroke 3, and Geeky 4. A lot of that's going to depend on which wingers go where and which pairings they like better, with which centers work better with which wing. But those are the four, yeah, that I do like, that I think will stand out. Johansson and Blackwell, I really do think they're better off on the wings. And I think that'll probably come out in training camp, and hopefully McCann can show that he's worthy of a top six role, at least temporarily.
Yeah, and something you just kind of touched on a little bit, what centers work with what wings, all that kind of building out chemistry stuff that we knew was going to be super important for training camp this year, as all these guys come in together. Most of them have never played with each other. It's going to be really important. So working off that a little bit is, the Kraken had a couple. My first question is, Kraken had a couple, late signings. They've happened a little more recently, a little after the first initial free agent buzz, and that's of course Marcus Johansson, and then most recently Ryan Donato. And you know, looking at the team that Ron Francis put together at the expansion draft and in the first couple days of free agency, we knew that this was going to be, very focused on two-way play, big team, very physical team, based on what we've seen from most of these guys before. And, my question is kind of how are those two guys going to fit in with this team? Because everything seemed, really cohesive before. And then these guys were both signed one way deals. We're pretty confident that they're going to be on this active roster. I'm interested to see what kind of roles they're going to play on this team. Do you have any ideas what you think they might do with them?
I mean, Johansson seemed to make a little more sense at first glance than Donato because Johansson, as much as he does have that history of being able to score and bring that kind of offensive game, he's not necessarily a bad two-way player. I think he can fit in the top six. I mean, sorry, in the bottom six pretty well. And when I was making the projected lineup, I didn't really have a whole lot of trouble finding places to put him. He seemed to kind of fit and move around, and I think that's something that's going to benefit the Kraken, certainly with Gord out to start the season. Ryan Donato is an interesting case. Now, I do like the move because it's so low risk. Obviously, signing him for league minimum, there's not a whole lot that you risk there. I did see a lot of Ryan Donato following the Sharks for the last couple seasons, and he struggled to find a place in an NHL lineup. I know teams that have brought him in, whether it was the Wild or the Sharks, right, or the Bruins who had him, they wanted to put him in the top six. They were kind of hoping that he would grab a top six job and provide enough offense to fit in there and work with these skilled players because he's got really good hands. He's got a good shot that just sometimes, you know what I mean? Sometimes you'll be like, wow, where did that come from as far as, having a good shot? And, I think it's the consistency. He just hasn't been able to put it together on a night in, night out basis. And defensively, I do think there's a lot for him to work on there. His two-way play is probably the worst of these forwards that we're looking at as we look at the lineup. Now, that is something that can be coached, and I know it's one thing that the Sharks certainly tried to coach into him, but it just didn't take, and I don't know, maybe the Kraken's coaching staff can do a better job, but yeah, I don't know exactly where he fits.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really for me more so than any of the specific, you know, who's going to be playing with who, what are the lines going to look like? Because we kind of have a little bit of a general idea of stuff. Most likely like guys like Eberle or Jaden Schwartz are going to be playing up. Obviously top six, most likely on the first line. So, but those two guys and yeah, especially Ryan Donato, that was just it felt really odd to me. So I'm excited to see what they have in store for him. What's your next question as we head into training camp?
So the next question has to do with the wingers and certain guys that can play up and down the lineup. And the Kraken drafted a few of those in the expansion draft. Mason Appleton, Kalle Yarncroke, Jonas Donskoy, Colin Blackwell are some of the names that come to mind. They can each play in the top six with the skill guys, but they can also play lower in the lineup with the depth guys, and they kind of bring their unique brand of hockey to whichever line they're on. Donskoy, for instance, can provide some creativity, some offensive skill, wherever he's put in the lineup. Mason Appleton, just brings energy and to wherever he's put. So I'm interested to see where the coaching staff envisions playing each of them. So Dylan, for those guys, where do you think they're going to slot in top six, bottom six for each of those four?
Yeah, so it is going to be pretty interesting. I do think Donskoy, even though he probably has the most experience in a top six role, certainly solid middle six guy. He's not going to be on the fourth line, I don't think. But I'm going to go ahead and lean bottom six for Donskoy just because I feel like this is a team that's going to value the speed and energy of a guy like a Colin Blackwell or a Mason Appleton a little bit more than the creativity he provides. I think they're going to save that for things like the power play, right? Uh, looking at our projected roster on the website right now, we got Mason Appleton up in the top six. I really think it's a toss up between him and Colin Blackwell right now. I just think both of them bring a lot of the same style, a lot of that same energy, a lot of the same versatility to the position. you know, Yarncroak, we have him slotted in at center right now because he kind of makes the most sense to be the center of the bunch. But once Yanni Gord comes back, I think he might also latch onto a top six winger role just because of his versatility, his ability to play with highly skilled players. We've seen that for years now from him. He can think the same way they think and stuff, and I think that's really valuable. But I want to see Mason Appleton in a top six role at least to start. I have questions about whether or not he can handle it, whether or not he can hang with normal top six guys, just as far as his playing style meshing with that, him thinking along the same lines as them. But I think it's worth the experiment. And then if it doesn't work, I think you just flip flop him with Colin Blackwell. And I think he's still going to bring energy and physicality and all that stuff that Mason Appleton can bring. But I think he's kind of proven that he can play with some more skilled level line mates. What about you?
I'm, as you know, we're big believers in the talent for Mason Appleton, and we think he can certainly carve out a top six role eventually. And like you said, I would like to see the coaches trust him with that. Given his age, I don't know that they will right away. I'm always skeptical when it comes to NHL coaching staffs and giving younger guys a chance like that. Donskoy is probably the most interesting question to me because he has done both in his career. He's played on a line with Nathan McKinnon, and Mikko Rantanen and Landeskog. He's played on those top lines in Colorado and fit in pretty well. Obviously, he doesn't drive the offense on that line because we all know who drives the offense there. But he's fit in well and he's had good scoring numbers. And then also with the Sharks before that in his career, he's played in the bottom six. And the thing that he's done is generate mismatches because he's usually so much more skilled than a lot of the players he's playing against when he's getting those minutes. And you look at the Avs, more of an offense first freewheeling type of team, choosing to use him in a top six role. And the Sharks, who maybe not as much in those teams in 2016, 2017, opted to use him in a bottom six role. I think the Kraken are closer to those Sharks teams. So I do think we'll see him in the bottom six.
Yeah, I agree with that. So my next question is related to the coaching staff, specifically Dave Haxtell, what we've seen of him from his time both as the head coach of the Flyers and then later as an assistant with the Maple Leafs. And my real question is, what is he going to do with this roster that Ron Francis has put together? Like I was saying earlier, it's very much all these guys are really solid two-way guys for the most part. There's very few just pure skill guys out there. The defense is just loaded up with these giant, hulking, bruising, tough defensemen that are just going to wear teams down. And we haven't seen Dave Haxtell really coach a team built like this before. And so I'm going to be really interested to see through training camp, through the preseason, how he mixes things up, what kinds of systems he wants to bring in and use. Obviously, he does lean a little more defensively. That was what he was doing well with Toronto. That was his job as an assistant was to focus on defense and stuff. And so I'm gonna be really trying to pay attention to what kinds of systems, what kinds of plays are they drawing up? What is the special teams going to look like? How is he going to utilize someone like a Jamie Alexiak versus a Vince Dunn? Obviously, we know Shane Gostisbehere's best years with the Flyers were while Dave Haxtell was there. Is he going to try to, have Vince Dunn kind of fill that role as this offensive defenseman that he's going to use to try to drive possession? Or is he going to lean on guys like Mark Giordano and Jamie Alexiak to just kind of wear opposing teams' top lines down? So I think there's a lot of questions about how Dave Haxtell is going to use this roster, and I'm excited to see what that might be. Do you kind of have any thoughts on what you think might happen?
I think one indication of how he might use the roster is, the roster construction in general. A lot of times when you have a head coach that's new to a team, they're basically inheriting the entire roster from whatever was left there essentially, and they have to kind of just use that as best as they can. One thing that's different with the Kraken is they're an expansion team, and while Haxtell didn't have the most say in what this roster looks like, this is Ron Francis's creation. Francis was not going to bring in someone who didn't share his philosophy as far as how he wanted the team to play. Haxtell was essentially handpicked by Francis to be the coach of this team. And so you figure they must be on the same page about how they're going to play. And I think you get a lot of hints about that based on the way the roster is built with these big defensemen, with these 200-foot game, defensively reliable forwards. It kind of shows you how the team's going to play, especially with how much money they've invested in goal and getting possibly the best goaltending tandem in the NHL. So I think they're designed to play a certain way, and I would be surprised if Haxtell doesn't, lean that way as far as how they're going to play.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what's your final question as we head into training camp on Thursday?
So my final question is the one that I might be looking most forward to an answer, because it's something that we've been wondering really since the day of the expansion draft, the way that the roster worked out. Um, which defensemen are in and which are out. One pretty much feature of the expansion draft, the current format, is that it's easier to draft more defensemen because teams can only protect their top three. You're going to find more valuable players and a team's fourth defenseman than, say, their eighth forward. And the Kraken did draft more defensemen than they really can have on their roster. You figure, Giordano, Alexiak, Larson are locks. Dunn, if there was some trade talk around him around the expansion draft, if they do decide they're going to keep him, they only signed him to a 2-year deal. But, if he's around, he's a lock to make the roster. But beyond that, you've got Soucy, Lauzon, Hayden Fleury, Will Borgen, Chalowski. That's 5 guys for really 2 regular D spots. And, then you have 1 or 2 scratches. But no matter what, someone's going to have to get moved. And this is an area where we know that they're going to be thinking about it this way. After the expansion draft, Ron Francis was asked about the surplus of defensemen and might we see any moves right away, like the Vegas Golden Knights did, trading some right away. And he said, well, you have a better indication of who you want to keep after seeing them in your uniform at training camp. So we've known this is coming for a while, and the time is finally here to see which defensemen make the best case to stick around. So Dylan, which ones do you think those are going to be? Who do you think is going to separate themselves and earn those last 2 spots?
Yeah, so I agree. Vince Dunn definitely had the most trade talk, but I think Seattle's got to keep him around. As I was saying, he's kind of like the only offensively minded guy. I think you need a power play quarterback type on your team. As far as those other guys, my gut instinct was to say Hayden Fleury is going to be the guy that's going to be moved, just because I feel like he has a lot of the stuff that a lot of other teams value a lot. He's pretty good offensively for someone of his size and his style of play and everything. But that being said, he was also one of the people there at the expansion draft, introduced to the fans, and so I don't know if they're going to trade someone who was there, right? One of the first people that fans got to know and got to hear from and got to see, how excited he was to be a member of the Seattle Kraken. I don't know that you can trade someone like that. Even though I think he probably would command the best, package back outside of, let's say, a Will Borgen, just because of his age. But I also don't want the Kraken to give up on him because of his age. I feel like he could really develop into something special potentially, so I want to see him hang around. So then it kind of comes down to Lauzon or Soucy, and I think Carson Soucy could probably fetch a decent return for the Seattle Kraken if they decide to move him, just because teams are going to be enamored with his size and his style of play. I think Lauzon's really good. I've been looking forward to having him on the Kraken, but kind of same thing. He's someone who's shown in the playoffs that he can handle some tough minutes. He can handle being out there against some top level competition in some big moments. So if the Kraken don't feel like they, have necessarily a top 4 role for Lauzon, maybe they don't want to just leave someone, who can command such a price down on their last pairing. I could see Lauzon move there, but I think for my money, I think Hayden Fleury seems the most likely to be traded, but also there are questions about, because he was there. If not him, then I think Carson Soucy is probably the guy who's going to be moved out.
Yeah, it's going to make for a tough call, and really thinking about it, there's nothing stylistically that separates these guys very much. They're all big physical defensemen. Chalowski is the one that stands out to me because he, I guess, is the most, offensive puck moving of the bunch. And that's almost why I even included his name on the list, because aside from Dunn, you don't really have anyone, on the roster who specializes in that. And so maybe he gets a look for that reason. I think he's probably waived and sent down to the AHL. But beyond that, Susi is the only one that stands out just because he's older and he's a more known quantity. You know what you have in him. But I think he's probably the most NHL ready and probably the best right now of those defensemen. So, I mean, I think this is something that really is going to be decided in training camp. I don't think, Ron Francis knows yet who he's going to send out. And that's going to create some competition, but that's going to make for an exciting training camp to watch because and these guys must know that one of them has to go, and it's going to depend on what they do in the coming few weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting at training camp and during those preseason games, right? As you were saying, we know some of these guys are locks to make the team. Mark Giordano, Jamie Alexiak, they're veterans. They've been around. They probably don't really need to see much ice time in the preseason, if any at all. And the Kraken already know that they're keeping them, so it'll be interesting to see through the preseason games, how they use some of these defensemen. If that's going to kind of give us a hint of who they're feeling more comfortable going with, and who they might not be as happy with, and might then be leaving sooner rather than later. But as you guys can see, there's tons of great questions that we have going into training camp. As always, we'd love to hear what questions you guys have heading into the Seattle Kraken's first ever training camp later this week on Thursday. As always, leave those below. We will read them. We'll do our best to respond to them. We're always excited to see, me and RJ miss stuff all the time, right? These are just what kind of popped into our heads. We're sure there's tons of other great questions out there too. As always, like this video if you can. It really helps us out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And, we'll be back later this week with a divisional preview for the Pacific Division. We're going to talk about all the teams that the Kraken are going to have to face this year. So make sure to hang around for that when it comes up. And we will see you all next time.